The marble floor reflected the morning sun when Ethan and his wife, Ashley, quietly stepped into their Beverly Hills mansion. They were supposed to be gone till evening, but as they reached the study, they froze. Their 8-year-old son, Tyler, sat cross-legged on the carpet, smiling, and next to him was Keisha, their black maid, holding a handful of colorful math blocks. "If we share 5 blocks among 3 friends," Keisha said softly, "what happens to the last one?" Tyler laughed. "We give everyone a little piece." Ashley's jaw tightened. Ethan's eyes narrowed. A black maid teaching their son? The silence burned heavier than any scream. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. "Keisha," Ethan finally said, voice low but trembling with anger, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" The warmth in the room vanished. Keisha looked up calmly, her dark eyes steady. "Tyler was struggling with division, sir. I was just showing him a different way to see numbers. You were hired to clean floors, not teach lessons." Ashley snapped. Tyler looked from his father to Keisha, confused. "But, Dad," "She helps me understand. Dr. Richardson makes me feel stupid." Ethan turned sharply. "Go to your room, Tyler. Now." The boy's footsteps faded upstairs, leaving only the ticking of the gold clock and Ethan's heavy breathing. Keisha rose slowly, her posture straight, composed. Too composed for someone being scolded. "I didn't mean to cross any lines, sir." "Lines?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "You crossed more than that. You don't touch my son's education again. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Hayes." Her tone remained even, respectful but strangely powerful. As she picked up the scattered blocks, Ethan noticed how her hands arranged them, not randomly, but in perfect patterns, precise and professional. Something about her movements, methodical, confident, made him pause. For a second, he wondered who exactly this woman was. Keisha placed a final block in the box, looked up, and simply said, "Some lessons, sir, are worth learning, no matter who teaches them." Ethan felt an unexpected chill crawl up his spine. He didn't know it yet, but that single moment had already begun to unravel his perfect world. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles. Keisha moved quietly, folding fresh laundry and humming to herself. Tyler peeked from behind the doorway, holding his math notebook like a secret. "Miss Keisha," he whispered, "can you show me that blocks thing again?" She smiled, kneeling beside him. "Only if you promise to finish breakfast first. Learning works better on a full stomach." He giggled, nodding, while he ate. She rearranged colored blocks into a pattern that made the numbers dance instead of scare him. Every few minutes, Tyler's small laugh echoed through the empty mansion, a sound that hadn't filled those walls in years. From the balcony above, Ashley watched silently. The sight made her uneasy. "She's getting too comfortable," she muttered to herself. Later that day, Ethan scrolled through emails in his glass-walled office. No matter how many zeros flashed on the screen, his mind stayed on that moment in the library. The calm confidence in Keisha's eyes. Something about her had felt educated. Too educated. In the living room, Tyler placed the last block down. "So it's okay if there's one left over, right?" "Exactly," Keisha said gently. "That little leftover just means there's still more to share. Life isn't always perfect divisions." He grinned. "Mom doesn't like when things aren't perfect." Keisha's smile softened. "Sometimes perfect isn't real. Kindness is." Outside, sprinklers clicked to life, sending arcs of water over the trimmed hedges. Inside, the house smelled of fresh bread and lemon polish. The rhythm of normal life returned, but only on the surface. When Ashley walked in, she noticed Tyler reading aloud from a storybook. His voice was clearer, confident. For a heartbeat, pride flashed in her eyes, until she saw Keisha beside him. The warmth froze instantly. "Tyler, bedtime." "Now." He hesitated. "But I want to finish now," Ashley repeated. As Tyler left, Keisha quietly gathered the books. "He's improving," she said softly. "He just needed someone to believe he could." Ashley didn't answer. Her expression was sharp, polite, dismissive. We pay professionals for that. Keisha nodded and stepped back, but her eyes carried something unspoken, sorrow mixed with strength. That night, when Ethan and Ashley sat for dinner, Tyler's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. The sound lingered in Ethan's ears longer than he wanted to admit. Something about this woman was changing his son, and it terrified him. Ethan couldn't focus on anything the next day. The morning meetings felt like background noise. Numbers blurred on the screen, and every time he blinked, he saw the same image. His son smiling at that black woman, as if she were the only person in the world who understood him. By noon, frustration turned into action. He buzzed his assistant through the intercom. "Jennifer, get me everything on our Maid. Background, references, everything. Today." There was a pause. "Any specific reason, sir?" "Call it due diligence," he said sharply. When he hung up, his reflection on the glass wall stared back, cold, angry, restless. He told himself it wasn't racism. It was about control. His house, his son, his rules. That evening, Keisha arrived as usual, calm and punctual. She greeted Ashley politely, helped Tyler with dinner, then started cleaning the library. But when Ethan walked in unexpectedly, her hand froze mid-dust. "Still cleaning in here, huh?" His voice carried an edge that made Tyler shrink back behind the couch. "Yes, sir. I wanted the shelves spotless," Keisha replied evenly. He stepped closer. "I've been thinking about yesterday. You seem to know a lot about teaching methods for someone who cleans houses." Keisha kept her tone soft. "You learn things when you care about people, Mr. Hayes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't play smart with me. Where did you learn those techniques?" "YouTube." She gave a faint smile. "The internet teaches plenty these days." That calmness again. It infuriated him more than open defiance would have. Later that night, Jennifer emailed him a short report. "Sir, this is odd. Her record starts in 2019. Before that, nothing. No employment, no education, no address." Ethan frowned. "So she just appeared out of nowhere?" "Pretty much," Jennifer said. "Her references are perfect. Almost too perfect." He leaned back in his chair. Something about this woman wasn't adding up. A ghost with spotless papers? The next morning, he made another call. "Marcus, I need a favor. Run a private check." Discreetly, Marcus chuckled on the other end. "You're running background checks on maids now." "I'm protecting my family," Ethan replied coldly. 2 days later, Marcus called back, his tone uneasy. "Man, I don't know who she really is, but this woman doesn't exist before 2019. No credit cards, no social security activity, nothing." Ethan stared out the window. Outside, the world looked the same, sunny, perfect, silent. But inside him, something dark was waking. He told himself it was about curiosity, but deep down, he knew what it really was. Fear. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. 3 days passed before Ethan got the call that shattered every assumption he'd ever had. "Mr. Hayes," said a firm male voice on the line. "My name's Detective Morales. I've finished your private requests." Ethan sat up. "And your maid, Keisha Daniels, isn't who she says she is." The words hit harder than he expected. "What do you mean?" Morales hesitated. "She legally changed her name 5 years ago after a sealed federal case. Her former identity, Dr. Keisha Daniels Mitchell, was one of Harvard's youngest education researchers. She disappeared after facing public harassment tied to a racial discrimination scandal in an elite university program." Ethan froze. His pulse roared in his ears. "You're telling me she's a doctor?" "Doctor of Education. Specialized in inclusive learning for children with special needs," Morales said. Her work was internationally cited. She was on track to lead a global program until everything went public. Racist smear campaign, death threats, the works. She vanished overnight. The call ended, but the silence afterward was unbearable. Ethan sat staring at nothing, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: shame. That evening, when Keisha arrived, he waited for her in the study. She entered with quiet grace, holding the usual cleaning tray. "You've been busy," she said calmly. Ethan stiffened. "You knew I'd find out?" "I counted on it," she replied. "Men like you always dig when they feel threatened." His voice cracked. "You lied to me. You hid who you are." Her tone stayed level. "I survived. There's a difference." He wanted to argue, but couldn't. Every accusation he had rehearsed felt hollow now. "You think working here makes you righteous?" he said bitterly. "You're a fraud." "No, Mr. Hayes," Keisha answered softly. "I'm proof that prejudice buries truth, but truth doesn't stay buried forever." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You think the world cares about your sob story?" Her gaze met his, calm but cutting. "The world doesn't need to care. Your son already does." The silence between them throbbed. Outside, wind rustled through the palm trees, brushing against the glass walls of the mansion like a whisper of reckoning. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock, Tyler's breathing through the baby monitor he still hadn't removed. He opened his laptop, typed Dr. Keisha Mitchell into the search bar, and froze as article after article appeared. Photos of her speaking at conferences, awards, research papers, interviews. Headlines read, "Rising Black Scholar Faces Backlash After Exposing Racism in Elite Schools." And one headline, dated 5 years ago, "Dr. Mitchell forced to resign after Billionaire-funded board cuts diversity program." The listed donor at the bottom made Ethan's stomach turn. The Hayes Education Foundation. Ethan woke up to chaos. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, headlines flashing across every news app. Breaking news. DR. Keisha Daniels Mitchell returns to expose systemic racism in elite education. He turned on the TV, and his stomach dropped. There she was, Keisha, standing behind a podium at the Harvard Education Institute, cameras flashing like lightning storms. Her voice was calm, powerful, echoing through every major network. "For 2 years, I lived under another name," she said. "I wanted to understand what happens when a black woman's qualifications mean less than her skin color. And I learned the answer inside a billionaire's mansion in Beverly Hills." The crowd gasped. Ethan's name appeared on the screen in bold letters. Ethan Hayes, founder of the Hayes Education Foundation. She continued, "While I cleaned his floors, I discovered the same man had funded initiatives that cut education opportunities for low-income black communities, initiatives that cost me my career." Ashley burst into the office, pale and shaking. "Ethan, what is she talking about?" He didn't answer. His throat had gone dry. On screen, Keisha held up printed documents. These are donation records showing how Mr. Hayes' foundation supported groups that blocked diversity funding in public schools. The same policies that silenced me. The camera zoomed in on her hands, steady, unafraid. "Mr. Hayes once told me I wasn't qualified to teach his son. But his son, Tyler, learned more from kindness and patience than from any paid expert. His progress is living proof that talent has no color." The audience erupted in applause. Reporters surrounded the podium, shouting questions. "Doc, Mitchell, are you taking legal action?" She paused and smiled faintly. "Justice doesn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it means truth finally being seen." Ethan turned off the TV and dropped into his chair, the room spinning. Outside, reporters were already gathering at the gates. His phone rang again. Marcus, his old friend. "Man, it's everywhere. CNN, BBC, The Times. You're trending for all the wrong reasons." Ethan rubbed his face. "Tell me this can be fixed." Marcus hesitated. "You didn't just lose a reputation, Ethan. You became the symbol of exactly what you fought against." Ashley stood frozen near the window. "You destroyed everything," she whispered. "All because you couldn't stand a black woman teaching our son." Ethan looked up, eyes hollow. For the first time, he had nothing to say. The world outside his mansion no longer feared him. It pitted him. 6 months later, Beverly Hills looked different to Ethan. The same mansion now felt like a museum of his mistakes, quiet, cold, and painfully spotless. Reporters no longer crowded the gates, but the silence was worse. He had lost everything: his company, his foundation, and most of his so-called friends. The world had moved on, except for him. On the other side of that same city, the Harvard-MIT Institute of Education held a ceremony. Cameras flashed, journalists cheered, and the banner behind the stage read, Dr. Keisha Daniels Mitchell, Chair for Inclusive Learning. She stood at the podium again, wearing a navy suit and quiet confidence. True education, she said, isn't about privilege. It's about opportunity. Even the smallest child can bloom if someone just believes they can. Among the applauding crowd sat a familiar face. Tyler, now confident, smiling, sitting proudly next to his mother. Ashley leaned over. She did this for him, she whispered, eyes soft for the first time in months. Keisha spotted Tyler in the audience and smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Her journey through humiliation had become a movement. Schools across the country were adopting her teaching method, and her research was being cited again, not as rebellion, but as reform. Meanwhile, Ethan lived alone in a modest apartment, working quietly at a public community center. He spent his days volunteering, fixing computers, teaching job skills to underprivileged teens. Some recognized him, most didn't. For the first time in his life, that anonymity felt right. One afternoon, he received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo, Tyler holding a certificate, Keisha standing beside him. At the bottom, a note in neat handwriting. He's thriving. I thought you should know. KDM. Ethan held the photo for a long time. The smile on his son's face was brighter than any billion-dollar deal he'd ever closed. That night, as he locked up the center, he paused at a classroom door where a small black girl practiced multiplication on a whiteboard. She looked up shyly. Mr. Hayes, can you help me? He smiled faintly. Sure, kid. Let's figure it out together. For the first time, teaching didn't feel like loss. It felt like redemption. The morning air inside the UCLA educational lab smelled faintly of coffee and chalk dust. Tyler sat at a round table, solving math puzzles surrounded by other children. His laughter filled the room, bright, confident, free. Across the glass partition, Keisha watched proudly. Beside her stood Ethan, hands clasped, quieter than she'd ever seen him. He cleared his throat. You built something incredible. She nodded slightly. I just rebuilt what people tried to tear down. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of children learning replaced the years of noise between them. Ethan looked down at the floor. I owe you more than I can say. Keisha met his eyes, calm and steady. You don't owe me, Mr. Hayes. You owe the world honesty. That's how real change begins. He took a slow breath. I'm not that man anymore. I know, she said softly. That's why I let you in today. Tyler turned toward them, beaming. Dad. Look, I solved it. Ethan's eyes glistened. You sure did, buddy. Keisha smiled gently. He doesn't need perfection. He just needs presence. Ethan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I used to think power meant control. Now I know it means responsibility. The class bell rang. Children ran past, their laughter echoing like forgiveness. Keisha gathered her notes while Ethan lingered at the door. Doc, Mitchell, he said quietly. If you ever need help funding these programs, she gave a faint smile, then make sure the help reaches the kids who can't afford it. That's all I'll ever need from you. He looked at her one last time, not as a billionaire looking down, but as a man finally learning. Thank you for teaching me too. Keisha turned back to the classroom, her voice gentle but firm. That's what I do, Mr. Hayes. I teach. Outside, sunlight poured through the windows, painting the children's desks in gold. The same light that once exposed hatred now revealed something different, grace. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.